A killing blizzard slammed into Sicily's Nebrodi Mountains on a forgotten winter night. At a shuttered mountain lodge, 7-year-old maid Alessia Amato was battling dead lines, a flickering bulb, and the chill seeping through cracked timber. Suddenly, there was a rumble in the snow. 25 armed mobsters staggered to her door, frostbitten and hunted by rivals. Though her heart raced at the glint of guns, her unyielding sense of hospitality made her draw a line: weapons in the bucket, or freeze outside. She let them in, turning killers into guests under her rules. She had no idea that by dawn, her mercy would draw 1,500 Sicilian Mafia soldiers to her threshold, rewriting the code of violence for a village on the edge. Before we begins, drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? And hit subscribe tomorrow. We've got an exclusive twist on Mercy's real price that you won't want to miss. It's 4:12 a.m. on the spine of the Nebrodi Mountains. Wind claws at the wooden lodge's timber siding, making the single amber porch bulb shiver like a candle in a crypt. Inside the shuttered winter lodge, Alessia Amato boils snow on a black iron stove and counts her inventory like rosary beads. A sack of flour, a jar of chickpeas, 2 broth cubes, a spool of thread, 3 clean sheets, and a half-empty bottle of grappa she keeps for disinfectant and for the nerves that come with nights like this. The phone lines are dead. The road is buried under feet of white. At 27 years old, she looks carved from the same unyielding stone as these peaks, hair pulled back in a practical braid, hands calloused from scrubbing floors no one else will touch, eyes sharp as the hooks her fisherman father used to mend nets. The lodge around her groans in the gale, a constant reminder of how far she is from the sea-salted villages below, where life pulses with markets and mischief. Up here, in this high isolation, she cleans for cash and sleeps for free, the owner long gone to warmer coasts. Alessia's small room off the kitchen holds the only bed she claims, a narrow cot piled with wool blankets that smell of pine and lye soap. The rest of the lodge, dining hall, washroom, storage loft, sits empty, a ghost of summer tourists who vanish when the snow flies. Her village, a cluster of stone houses clinging to the valley flank, feels worlds away in storms like this. The families there eye her with a mix of pity and pride, the girl who left the docks to chase steady work, only to end up playing housekeeper to shadows. No husband waits for her below, no Jerome to abandon her like a snagged line. Her father had been the anchor, teaching her that hospitality wasn't kindness, but a vow. Open the door to the lost, Figlia, but draw the line where your home begins. The sea gives no mercy to the foolish. He'd died 3 winters back, nets unpaid, leaving her to fend alone. The divorce from the sea? It was stamped in salt and silence, the kind that stings deeper than any court paper. Alessia's phone, more relic than lifeline, buzzes faintly on the shelf, but the signal died hours ago. A text from the village grocer glows unread. Storm closing roads. No deliveries till thaw. Stay safe. The words land like a quiet blow. She'd lost her side gig at the clinic last month when a flu outbreak kept her scrubbing longer hours. No time for bandages. The lodge owner had cut her pay when tourists thinned, claiming hard times while sipping espresso in Palermo. How do I keep the stove lit if the world shuts me out? She murmurs to the empty hall, glancing at the zinc bucket by the door, her father's old fishing pail, now a sentinel for stray tools. The village below had whispered about protection fees from shadowy families, the kind that broke more than nets. Alessia had seen the toll. Fathers like hers, heads bowed, hands empty. But up here, she was invisible, her rules her own. Her father's voice echoes in the steam rising from the stove, gruff but steady. Alessia, remember what Nana taught about the fisherman's code. That blend of salt, garlic, and vow keeps the storm at bay. One day, when the cold bites deepest, it might just save you. She'd nodded then, a girl mending lines by lantern light, never dreaming she'd need salvation from chickpeas and grappa. But now, tallying her scant supplies, those words feel like an anchor in the drift. She pulls out her grease-stained notebook, the pages filled with lodge inventories and half-forgotten prayers. Her father had run a small trattoria by the docks before the debt swallowed it, serving stew to sailors who paid in stories. Maybe it's time to hold the line, she thinks, though doubt gusts like the wind outside. The next morning, or what passes for it in endless night, Alessia rations her fuel, propping the stove door to nurse the embers. She sets a small pot on the windowsill, a makeshift sign for any lost soul. Shelter for the cold bread and broth. Marcus has no equivalent here. Her solitude is her child, fragile and demanding. But as the hours blur, reality settles like fresh powder. She peers through frost-laced glass at the whiteout, watching phantom shapes in the trees, hunters, maybe, or fools chasing myths. The village grocer's boy had braved the edge of the storm yesterday, trading news for a hot meal. Rival clans stirring in the valleys, old feuds thawing with the snow. Alessia's heart quickens, but she shakes it off. Up here she's just the maid. Yet as the day bleeds into evening, the cold sharpens. Reports from a crackling radio before it dies warn of the worst blizzard in decades, winds carving the peaks like knives. Alessia bundles tighter, her shearling-lined coat a second skin, hair damp from melted snow. She turns the stove higher, but the lodge fights back, drafts whispering through shutters. A nagging chill builds, not just from the storm, but the isolation pressing like a vice. By the second night, the cold turns vicious. Alessia huddles by the stove, breath fogging the air, rationing broth cubes like gold. The amber bulb flickers, casting long shadows on the wooden walls. The snow piles against the door, sealing her in a tomb of white. On the third night, as she stirs chickpeas into a thin stew, listening to the wind howl like forsaken souls, a sound pierces the gale, faint at first, then unmistakable. The low growl of engines, tires crunching ice, boots thudding through drifts. Headlights smear the snowfield, shapes emerging from the dark, broad-shouldered men in dark coats, faces shadowed, some limping, others clutching sides. The rumble swells, surrounding the lodge like a siege. Through the frosted pane, Alessia counts them. 25, staggering from the forest edge, guns glinting under the porch light. Her pulse thunders. Who rides bikes and cars into this hell, tourists? No, these are men of the valleys, the kind her father warned carried trouble in their pockets. The engines cut, silence heavier than the snow. Footsteps crunch closer, voices muffled but urgent. Then the knock, 3 deliberate raps on the heavy door, echoing like judgment. Alessia's hand freezes on the ladle. In all her years tending this forgotten perch, no one has come knocking in a blizzard, especially not an army of shadows. The knock repeats, insistent, a voice cutting through. Signorina, per favor, we're dying out here. Her mind races. Rivals? Witnesses to bury? Why her door of all places? The wind screams, and the knock lands a third time. The third knock reverberates through the timber like a gunshot, and Alessia feels her heart seize. She presses against the kitchen wall, as far from the door as the stove's glow allows, clutching the notebook like a shield. Who's there? She calls, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. We're no threat, the voice replies, rough with cold and strain. Just men caught in the white. One's bleeding bad won't last the hour. Through the narrow window slit, Alessia glimpses them. 25 figures in wool coats and scarves, snow crusting their shoulders, faces etched with exhaustion. The leader steps forward, broad as the doorframe, his beard flecked white, eyes piercing even in the storm. When he meets her gaze, she ducks, pulse roaring. We see the light, he says. We freeze out here, or wait inside. We'll go at first break. Every tale of mountain feuds floods her clans that vanish witnesses in snowdrifts. But she spots a younger one swaying, lips blue, a dark stain blooming on his coat. Blood, not just frost. These aren't raiders, they're broken, desperate as the fishermen her father dragged from swells. Her father's code surges. Help the traveler, even if he bears thorns. The mountain remembers debts. She'd lived it, sharing stew with drifters who paid in silence. But 25, armed? It's madness or mercy's edge. Another knock, softer. The boy's fading, begging you, just till dawn. Alessia closes her eyes, weighing the risk. She hears the raw plea, sees the slump of the wounded. Not predators, survivors, like her in this endless night. She rises, legs leaden, and approaches the door, the zinc bucket waiting like judgment. How many? She asks through the wood. 25. We don't leave brothers behind. The number crashes over her, 25 strangers in her fragile sanctuary, foolish, or the vow her father died by. She touches the latch, summoning steel. I'm Alessia, she says, unlocking the bolt. Weapons in the bucket first. Respect my roof, or die in the snow. The door creaks open, and the leader nods, eyes holding hers gratitude flickering beneath the wear. Agreed, I'm Corrado. We won't forget. One by one, they file in, metal clattering into the pail, coats shedding snow on the threshold. The lodge fills with their quiet presence. No chaos, just a hush of reverence. Alessia spots the wounded youth Saro. They murmur, his cough rattling like drowned bells. As she kneels to check him, the men watch. Not with threat, but awe. The stove's warmth stirs, and for the first time in the storm, the space feels less like a tomb and more like a truce. As the last boot stamped clear of snow, Alessia straightened from her kneel beside Saro, the young man's ragged breaths filling the sudden hush like a bellows on the stove. The lodge, once a hollow echo of timber and drafts, now pulsed with 25 bodies' coats shedding flakes that hissed against the iron floor. Eyes darting from the zinc bucket's gleam to her unyielding stance in the doorway. The amber bulb overhead cast their shadows long and jagged, like branches clawing at the walls. But no one moved without her nod. Corrado, the broad-shouldered leader, lingered by the threshold, his weathered face a map of deference, waiting for the rules to solidify what her open door had begun. Alessia felt the weight of their gazes, not as threats but as a tide testing her shore. Her father's code thrummed in her veins. Hospitality bound them now, but only if she held the line. "This isn't a barracks," she said, voice cutting the steam like a knife through fog. "It's shelter, largest of you against the outer wall, block the cold like stones in a breakwater, smallest, nearest the stove. No crowding the heat." Murmurs rippled, but they shifted without protest. The biggest men hulking figures in wool greatcoats pressing shoulder to shoulder along the drafty planks, their bulk a living barrier. The slighter ones, like the wiry one with the scarred knuckles, edged closer to the stove's glow, hands outstretched but careful, as if the fire might bite back. She scanned the room, assigning the rest like a captain charting swells. 2 at a time, rotations to the porch, chop snow ice for water. "Melt it slow. We don't waste fuel." A pair near the door, Vito and Enzo. They grunted their names, nodded and shuffled out, axes from the storage loft in hand. The wind snatched at the door as it swung, but they wedged it shut behind them, the rhythmic thuds of their work soon punctuating the gale outside. Inside, order bloomed from chaos. Boots aligned by the mat, helmets stacked like offerings, the air thickening with the scent of wet leather and pine from the fire. Alessia moved among them, her shearling coat brushing elbows, directing with gestures honed from corralling lodge guests who drank too much limoncello. These men, though, carried the salt of deeper seas, blood and fealty, not just wanderlust. The triage began with hands. Frostbite clawed at them all, fingers stiff and mottled like fish left too long on ice. Alessia filled basins from the melting pot, the water lukewarm as blood, and lined the men along the scarred oak table. "No rubbing," she commanded, her tone brooking no debate. That kills tissue faster than the cold. A few grumbled instincts of rough men used to slapping sense into numb limbs, but they obeyed, dipping into the basins with winces that twisted their faces. She watched capillary refill, pressing nails to check the pink return, her own hands steady from years of binding cuts on the docks. One by one, she wrapped them in strips torn from spare sheets, the fabric blooming white against their skin. "Keep them dry, move your fingers slow, like threading a needle." Mimo Ventura went next, the one with the scalp gash that wept crimson into his collar. He sat rigid on a stool by the stove, his frame lean but etched with the lines of a man who'd seen bridges burn. The wound gaped under his matted hair, a jagged line from some branch or blow in the escape. Alessia lit a lantern close, the flame dancing shadows across his furrowed brow, and threaded her needle with fishing lines strong, sterile enough in Grappa's bite. "Hold still," she said, pouring the liquor over the cut. Mimo hissed, fists clenching on his knees, but his eyes met hers grateful, almost boyish in the vulnerability. The men formed a loose circle, averting gazes as the needle pierced skin, stitching in tight, even pulls. Blood beaded like dark berries, but she worked methodically, tying off the final knot with a tug. "It'll scar," she warned, dabbing it clean. "But you'll live to wear it." Mimo touched the edge gingerly, murmuring a Sicilian benediction that hung in the air like incense. Saro demanded her focus most. The youth sprawled in the washroom's nook, the lodge's warmest pocket, steam curling from a jury-rigged pot on the adjacent stove. His cough drowned the wind, wet and relentless, lungs heavy with swallowed snow. Alessia propped him on his side, pillows from the linen closet under his head, and boiled more water to thicken the air. "Breathe through it," she coached, her palm on his forehead fever-hot, slick with sweat. The men hovered at the threshold, faces taut. This was no soldier's wound, but a thief in the night. She mixed grappa with honey from a cracked jar, the amber liquid sweet against the liquor's fire, and coaxed it past his blue lips in sips. Swallow slow, loosen the rattle. Sorrow's eyes fluttered, locking on hers with a trust that pierced her guard. Between coughs, he rasped, "Grazie, signorina." "I thought the mountain had me." Alessia nodded, hiding the knot in her throat. Mercy wasn't soft. It was this fighting death with what scraps the storm allowed. In the pauses, glimpses of the men emerged, like stars pricking a clouded sky. Giovanni Gio. He called himself, melted into the shadows by the outer wall. His cheek gash a fresh slash under one eye, surname buried deeper than the snow. He watched Alessia with a quiet intensity, not the predatory stare of the hunted, but admiration for the fearlessness that mirrored his own buried rebellions. When she passed with a basin, he shifted to let her through, murmuring, "You command like you've faced worse than us." She met his gaze briefly, dark, haunted, and saw the weight he carried. Unspoken. Gio turned away, hiding whatever name burned on his tongue, content to be just another guest in her fragile domain. Stefano Bellomo, slighter than most, warmed his hands near the stove, his coat patched with threads that spoke of careful mending. As Alessia refilled his basin, he fumbled in his pocket, drawing out a simple gold cross on a worn chain, small, unadorned, catching the lantern's glow. "My mother's," he said softly, voice threading the room's low hum. "She wore it through harder storms than this. Said it reminded her warmth starts with what you carry inside." He pressed it into her palm briefly, the metal cool against her skin, before tucking it back. Alessia nodded, the gesture a bridge across the chasm of their worlds. In his eyes, she saw Enrico's shadow restrained, thoughtful, but here, Stefano was just a nephew sharing a talisman against the night. Tension cracked the calm like ice underfoot. Riccardo Calvano, a stocky man with a bull's neck and resentment smoldering in his glare, paced near the bucket, his empty holsters chafing like insults. "This ain't right," he muttered, loud enough for the room to hear, fists balling as he eyed the zinc pail. "We stack our iron for a maid? In our own hills?" Heads turned, the air thickening, rotations halting mid-chop outside. Alessia paused mid-stitch on a bandage, meeting his stare without flinching. "My roof, my rules," she said evenly. "You want warmth? Earn it. Or the door's open." Riccardo stepped forward, chest heaving, but Gaetano Ruggieri's brother Sal, senior among them, his frame scarred like old oak, intervened, hand firm on Riccardo's shoulder. "Easy, Fratel," Sal growled, voice low thunder. "She's saved us already." Corrado's word, and mine we follow. The mediation hung, Sal's eyes flicking to Alessia with a nod of respect, the kind forged in ambushes, not arguments. Riccardo subsided, muttering curses into his collar, but the room exhaled, the stove's crackle reclaiming the space. Alessia resumed her work, the incident a reminder. Vows held, but trust was a slow thaw. As the rotations brought in fresh ice melting in pots that steamed the windows, Alessia tallied the night. The men settled into shifts, some dozing against walls, others sharing hushed tales of the ambush that had scattered them like chaff. The lodge breathed warmer, broth simmering from chickpeas and cubes, a fragile pulse against the storm's roar. But as she wiped her hands on her apron, glancing at the bucket for one last count, a chill unrelated to the drafts prickled her skin. Metal gleamed pistols, knives. The sawed-off but one shape was absent. A pistol, small and snub-nosed, gone from where it should have clattered in. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the shadows. Who hadn't fully surrendered? The wind howled approval, and Alessia wondered if her line had already been crossed. The shadows in the lodge clung like secrets, but Alessia's eyes, sharpened by years of spotting flaws in lodge linens or lies in a guest's smile, cut through them. The zinc bucket sat sentinel by the door, its contents a cold testament to her terms, pistols nested like sleeping serpents, knives glinting dully, the sawed-off shotgun a blunt threat now tamed. But the count was off. One pistol, compact and mean, absent from the pile. Her gaze swept the room, landing on Tano Neri, a lean man with hawkish features and boots caked in fresh snow, propped against the outer wall as if blending into the timber. He avoided her stare, fiddling with a loose thread on his coat, but the bulge in his right boot betrayed him a tell as obvious as a snagged net. Alessia moved without fanfare, her steps soft on the worn floorboards, the steam from the stove veiling her approach like mountain mist. The men sensed the shift, conversations trailing into murmurs, but she raised a hand, gentle, yet iron. Tano stiffened as she knelt before him, her face level with his, close enough to smell the pine resin on his gloves. "The bucket's light," she said quietly, voice a thread in the room's hush. "Show me your boot." His jaw tightened, eyes flicking to the others, seeking allies in the dimness, but none stirred. The wind battered the shutters, underscoring the isolation. Tano hesitated, then sighed, a sound like defeat, and tugged up his trouser leg. The pistol nestled there, cold metal against wool, its grip worn smooth by use. He pulled it free, holding it out like an apology wrapped in reluctance. "Didn't mean disrespect," he muttered, voice gravel rough. "Old habits. The cold. Makes you cling." Alessia took it without touching his hand, her fingers steady as she weighed its heft. "Habits die in my house, or you do outside." She rose, crossing to the bucket and dropping it in with a deliberate clink that echoed like a gavel. Tano's shoulders sagged, but he nodded, the act stripping him of one more layer. Word spread in whispers. Sal Ruggieri, Gaetano's brother, leaned from his spot by the stove, relaying Corrado's discipline relayed through the chain. "The capo's clear," Sal said, his voice carrying to the corners. Bruno Spadaro nodding beside him like a second. "We stack all, or we stack nothing. Her roof, our oath break it, and the storm's the least of your worries." The room absorbed it, compliance rippling outward. A few padded hidden pockets, but nothing surfaced. Strangers no more, they were guests now, bound by the bucket's decree. With the air cleared, Alessia felt the night's pulse steady, the stove's glow pushing back the blue-black chill seeping through cracks, to forge them further from phantoms. She retrieved her grease-stained notebook from the shelf, its pages warped from steam and salt air, a relic of inventories and her father's old tallies. She lit a fresh candle stub, the flame dancing amber on the scarred table, and gathered them closer, not in a circle of threat, but a hearth of reckoning. "Names," she said simply, pen poised. "So if you fall before dawn, I can pray for you proper. Strangers don't get mercy without accountability." They came one by one, voices low, as if naming themselves aloud wove them into the lodge's warp. Salvatore Sal Ruggieri first, his tone steady as he traced a scar on his knuckle. Vito Cataldo followed, gruff but grateful. Enzo Milazzo, then Luca Barone, his whisper carrying a fisherman's lilt. Antonio Nino Paterno, Carlo Zito, Domenico Mimoventura, the one she'd stitched, his eyes softening as he spoke. Raffaele Randazzo, Paolo Loria, Pietro Occhipinti, Giovanni Gio, Santoro. He lingered in shadow, surname dropped like a stone in deep water, but Alessia noted the hesitation, the way his gaze darted as if the name alone might summon ghosts. Riccardo Calvano, still simmering but compliant. Matteo Giannone, Angelo Zappola, Franco De Angelis, Bruno Spadaro, Stefano Bellomo, the crossbearer, his voice a murmur of quiet faith. Fabrizio Lentini, Nicola Quattrocchi, Rosario Saro Vitelli, rasping from the washroom, the name a fragile thread. Gaetano, Tano Neritano himself, meeting her eye with newfound respect. Carmelo Ferlito, Michele De Luca, Maurizio Puglisi, and finally Antonino, Nino Caracciolo, the last straggler sealing the ledger at 25. As the ink dried, Alessia's hand paused on the page, the names blurring into memory. Her father's face surfaced unbidden, weathered as these peaks, standing on the dock with nets in tatters, refusing the protection money from men in sharp suits who came like wolves in wool. "We pay the sea, not the shadows," he'd growled, even as they slashed his lines that night, leaving him to mend by lantern light, fingers bleeding into the cords. The price had been high. Lost catches, whispers in the village, a slow drift toward debt that claimed him young. Alessia had watched it all, a girl of 10, learning that hospitality's vow cut both ways, saving souls, but staking your own. These men, with their hidden allegiances, echoed those shadows. Sheltering them risked the same unraveling. Yet here she sat, pen in hand, humanizing her stake, not just a maid's whim, but a daughter's echo, refusing to let fear fray the line. The ledger closed the stranger's veil, and the room softened, the stove blooming like a miniature sun, its iron belly radiating waves that thawed tongues as well as bones. Broth simmered now, chickpeas swelling in garlic-laced water, and Alessia portioned it into tin mugs, the steam curling like offered peace. In the lull, as rotations fetched more ice, and the wind's howl dulled to a moan, the men leaned in unprompted, tentative. "A story for the warmth," Mimo ventured, his stitched scalp a badge under the light. "Harmless ones from before the life." They traded them like embers, voices weaving a fragile tapestry. Sal spoke first, of boyhood chases through olive groves, stealing figs from Nana's tree, and hiding in the roots till dusk, laughter chasing the sun. Vito recalled a fisherman's prank rigging a boat with whoopee cushions, the old salt's curses turning to guffaws on the swell. Enzo shared a Christmas tale of building snowmen in the valleys, only for a goat to butt them down, scattering the family in hysterics. Luca, the lilt returning, described racing cicadas with his brothers, bare feet blistering on hot stones, the summer air thick with cicada song. Nino Paterno grinned at a memory of Nonno's puppet shows, wooden knights battling dragons in the courtyard, the whole village cheering from blankets. Carlos was quieter, learning to whistle like a bird from his sister, fooling the neighborhood into thinking the woods alive. Mimo, warming to it, recounted a festival where he danced the tarantella so wildly he toppled into the bonfire's edge, singed pants and all, the crowd roaring approval. The stories flowed. Light as the grappa she doled in sips, Raffaele's lost puppy adventure, Paolo's first ill-fated olive harvest, Pietro's tree-climbing mishap that ended in a thorn bush embrace. Gio, from the shadows, offered a clipped one, sneaking limoncello from his father's cabinet at 12, the burn teaching him respect for fire. Ricardo, tension easing, admitted to a childhood bet gone wrong, racing bikes down a hill, wiping out into a mud puddle, pride muddier than his clothes. The circle widened. Matteo's village fair pie-eating contest, Angelo's ghost stories by candlelight that scared him most. Franco's was of catching fireflies in jars, releasing them at dawn like stars returning home. Bruno chuckled at a sibling rivalry over the last cannoli, truce sealed with shared bites. Stefano's tale turned tender, his mother teaching him to thread beads for rosaries, her gold cross glinting as she hummed old hymns. Fabrizio, Nicola, Saro's faint murmur of a seaside kite that tangled in the cliffs, each thread pulling them closer, the stove's glow gilding their faces young again. Alessia listened, mug in hand, the notebook a bridge between them. The interlude wrapped the night in unexpected grace, the storm outside a distant chorus to their human hum. But grace fractured as a cough tore from the washroom, wet, fast, like water rushing a broken dam. Alessia's mug clattered down, her pulse spiking as she rushed to Saro. His skin burned under her palm, fever raging, breaths shallow and labored, chest heaving with the slosh of fluid she feared was edema, claiming his lungs. The men fell silent, the story's warmth turning to dread. Pulmonary edema, her father's word for the sea's revenge on the drowned. Time was slipping, and Alessia's rules might not hold against this thief in the dark. The washroom steam thickened like a veil as Alessia knelt beside Saro, his coughs erupting in wet bursts that rattled the porcelain basin. Pulmonary edema, she knew the signs from her father's dockside, yarns of men pulled from the swells, lungs flooded like overfull nets. His temperature scorched her palm, skin slick and flushed, breaths coming in shallow gasps that barely lifted his chest. The men crowded the threshold, faces etched with the helplessness of warriors facing an invisible foe, but Alessia waved them back. "Space," she snapped, the command a lifeline in the chaos. "This fight's mine," Corrado nodded, pulling the others into the hall, their murmurs fading to a tense hush broken only by the stove's distant crackle. She jury-rigged a steam bath with what the lodge offered, the narrow tub filled halfway with melted snow, a heavy pot straddling the adjacent gas ring in the kitchen nook, its whistle a metronome to the night's grim rhythm. Towels draped the doorframe to trap the vapor, turning the space into a humid cocoon, the air heavy with the scent of damp wool and rising mist. Alessia eased Saro onto his side, propping his head with a rolled blanket to drain the fluid's pull, his body limp as a beached catch. "Stay with me," she murmured, checking his lips pale blue, edging toward gray, then pressing her thumb to his nail bed, watching the refill, sluggish, a sluggish tide refusing to turn. The kettle whistled first at 2:17 a.m. and, sharp as a warning, she refilled it, the cycle marking time like her father's old hourglass, grains of sand replaced by steam clouds. Hours blurred in the whistle's cadence, 2:47, 3:12, 3:38 each boil, coaxed more vapor into Saro's labored inhales, Alessia wiping his brow with cool cloths, coaxing sips of grappa honey through cracked lips. The men rotated silent vigils outside, Sal bringing fresh ice without a word, Mimo murmuring a prayer in dialect that wove through the steam like incense. Exhaustion clawed at her, but Mercy's vow held her upright, a fisherman hauling against the current. In a rare lull, as the 4-5 whistle faded, Gio slipped in shadow quiet, his gash a dark crescent under the lantern's glow. He crouched opposite her, hands idle for once, eyes on sorrow but voice pitched low for her. "You don't flinch," he said, almost accusatory. "Most would have bolted the door on us. Why fight for him like this?" Alessia didn't look up, her fingers tracing sorrow's pulse thready, but persistent. Gio's confession spilled then, unbidden, as if the steam loosened more than lungs. "I ran once," he admitted, gaze distant, fixed on the misted mirror. "From my father's world. Expectations like chains do this. Be that, carry the weight, or break under it." Thought freedom was in the shadows, away from the name. He didn't say Santoro, but the shame laced his words, a sun adrift in his own storm. She met his eyes then, the lantern gilding her braid like a crown of resolve. "Duty's no chain if you choose the knot," she countered softly, the story rising unbidden from her depths. "My father told of fishermen off the coast, storm hit, nets lost, wives waiting on the pier. One gale, 3 boats turned back into the teeth of it, not for glory, but because the sea's call was theirs to answer. Duty's a choice, Gio like opening this door. Run from it, and you drown in regret. Row into it, and you might save more than yourself." Her words hung, a counterpoint to his flight, forging a fragile thread between them. Gio nodded, the admission sealing something unspoken, a pact in the vapor, where confessions breathed easier than commands. The night wore on, whistles marking the battle's ebb 4:32, 4:58 until the men, sensing the vigil's toll, gathered in the hall. As Alessia emerged briefly to stoke the stove, Corrado pressed a damp roll of bills into her hand-crumpled euros, heavy with the scent of leather and haste. "For this," he said gruffly, gesturing to the room. "The food, the fight, take it." The others nodded, Sal adding a few notes from his pocket, the offering a gesture toward balance in her unbalanced bargain. Alessia weighed the wad, then peeled off just enough for chickpeas and Cube's pantry restock, nothing more. The rest she pushed back, firm as the bolted door. "You'll need it to bury your dead," she said, voice steady but laced with the weight of names in her ledger. "Mercy's not for sale, it's a vow. Keep your coin for the graves mines and the warmth you leave behind." The refusal rippled through them, not offense but awe, the pact crystallizing. They were guests, not debtors, bound by her terms in a world that traded lives like currency. Corrado pocketed the bills without argument, the men exchanging glances that spoke of shifted sands. The 5-3 whistle pierced the haze, and Alessia rushed back as Saro stirred his cough, easing to a rasp, fever shattering like ice under sun. She checked his lips, pink returning, capillary refill swift as a healthy swell. His eyes fluttered open, clear for the first time, locking on hers with a weak smile. "The mountain, let go," he whispered, the rattle gone. Relief crashed over her, a wave long held at bay. Alone for a breath, Alessia turned to the misted wall, allowing 1 minute 60 seconds of silent tears, hot tracks down her cheeks, sobs muffled in her sleeve. Not weakness, but the cost of the fight, the vow's quiet toll. Then she straightened, wiping her face, and stepped out. "He's through the worst," she announced to the waiting faces. "Sleep in shifts now 2 hours each. Dawn's close, rest earns the road." The lodge settled into a fragile peace, men curling against walls or the stove's edge, breaths sinking with the dying gale. Alessia doled thin broth, the warmth a balm, and for a span, the space held no ambitions, just survival's afterglow. As the first gray light bruised the horizon, filtering through iced panes, a dawn grin cracked the night's grip. Saro sat up, sipping water, color returning like spring to stone. The men rose, shaking stiffness from limbs, gathering coats and helmets with murmurs of thanks. They melted ice one last time, sharing the final mugs, the pact etched in every glance. Gio lingered as they prepared to file out, his gash bandaged neatly, eyes holding hers a beat longer. "Signorina Amato," he said, the name a quiet bow, laced with shame that twisted unspoken why it stung him, a secret buried deeper than his flight. "You gave us more than shelter." She nodded, sensing the weight he carried, the Santoro shadow unspoken but present. The door creaked open to a world hushed under fresh powder, the 25 stepping into the crisp air, boots crunching like farewells. But as the last man crossed the threshold, a low hum stirred from the valley below, not wind, but engines, a distant sea of them swelling, growing, thundering up the mountain like judgment on wheels. Whew! Can you imagine staring down 25 armed men with just a bucket and your wits? If Alessia's grit is firing you up, pause here and drop a like if you'd open that door. Comment below. What's the boldest act of kindness you've ever pulled off? And if you're loving this mountain thriller, subscribe now. I've got the full twist on the army's arrival coming right up in the next chapter. The door swung shut behind the last of the 25, the zinc bucket's echo fading into the lodge's quiet like a breath held too long. Alessia stood on the porch, her shearling coat dusted with fresh flakes, watching their silhouettes dissolve into the gray dawn boots carving faint paths through the crusted snow, breaths clouding the air like unspoken vows. The storm had relented to a whisper, the Nebrodi peaks etched sharp against a sky-bruising lavender, but the hum from the valley swelled, no longer distant thunder but a tide rising. Engines, hundreds of them, a mechanical sea churning up the mountain road, headlights piercing the mist like silver lances. Her pulse quickened. The men had scattered toward the tree line, but this was no echo of their flight. This was power, overwhelming and inexorable, come to claim what the night had forged. The first vehicles breached the clearing, sleek black sedans flanked by rumbling motorcycles, tires crunching ice in disciplined formation. Corrado's columns, she realized with a chill, the field commander's precision turning chaos into ranks. Cars fanned out in precise arcs, headlights sweeping the snowfield like searchlights on a midnight swell, while bikes formed serried lines at the edges, leather-clad riders statuesque against the white. More poured in 50, 100, then waves of them, filling the valley's mouth until the forest seemed to breathe machines. The air vibrated with their growl, exhaust mingling with the crisp bite of pine, the lodge's amber bulb flickering in response as if bowing to the intrusion. Alessia gripped the doorframe, her mind racing to the ledger's names. Had one of them signaled this? Or was it the silencing she'd dreaded, witnesses erased in the light of day? The engines peaked in a roar that shook snow from the eaves, then miraculously fell silent. Corrado, emerging from the lead car, raised a gloved hand, the gesture rippling backward like a command through wheat. One by one, the rumble died. A motorcycle here, a sedan there, the wave cascading until the clearing held only the hush of idling anticipation, 1,000 eyes fixed on the lodge. 1,500 souls, she counted in the blur, soldiers in dark wool coats, faces shadowed under brims, rifles slung but hands ready. The stillness was respect, not restraint. The mountain itself seemed to lean in, the wind holding its breath. From the vanguard stepped the inner circle, snow dusting their shoulders like ash from a fallen empire. Don Vittorio Santoro led, a figure of old-world gravity, tall, silver at the temples, his greatcoat tailored sharp as a blade, eyes deep-set and unreadable. At his shoulder, Enrico Bellomo, the consigliere, wire frames glinting, his restrained intelligence a quiet force. Salvatore Turi Vitelli followed, underboss broad and paternal, scanning the porch with a father's urgency. Gaetano Ruggieri brought up the rear, Senior Capo's scars whitening under the dawn, jaw set like quarried stone. They advanced through the ranks, the army parting like sea to shore, boots silent on the crust. Alessia's hand tightened on the knob. These were the architects of the shadows her father had defied, the code that broke nets and bent villages. Turi broke first, shoving past the threshold as his gaze locked on Sero, who'd staggered out to lean against the porch rail, color faint but returning. Nipote, Turi rasped, voice cracking like ice underfoot, closing the distance in 2 strides to cradle the young man's face. Tears froze on his lashes, the underboss's fierce facade crumbling, hands trembling as he traced Saro's cheek. Thought the saints took you. Saro managed a weak nod, the reunion a raw wound laid bare, the army witnessing in reverent quiet. Vittorio's eyes, meanwhile, pierced the gloom behind Alessia, landing on Gio at the lodge's rear hat in hand, shame etching his stance like frost on glass. The Don didn't rush, his stride measured, but the recognition hit like a bowstring released, his estranged son, alive amid the stragglers. Gio met the gaze, unflinching yet bowed, the unspoken fracture between them humming louder than any engine. Vittorio halted, the weight of bloodlines settling, the clearing holding its collective breath. Then, impossibly, the Don turned to Alessia. He stepped forward, snow whispering under his polished boots, and slowly, deliberately bowed his head, the gesture a seismic shift in the dawn light. Snowflakes caught in his silver hair, the army murmuring a low wave of awe rippling through the ranks, whispers of La Maid and Il Miracolo threading the hush. "You kept my blood alive," Vittorio said, voice resonant as a chapel bell, rising to meet her eyes. "And his," he added, nodding to Turi, who still clutched Saro like a lifeline. Enrico's frames hid a flicker of emotion, Gaetano's scar twitching in silent accord. The bow lingered, respect etched in every line of the Don's frame, the stillness amplifying it like a vow renewed. Alessia's heart thundered, anticipation twisting to dread. Silencing this was it, the price for seeing too much, for disarming the Don's own. She braced, mind flashing to her father's broken nets, the village's bowed heads. But Vittorio straightened, his offer cutting the fear like dawn through mist. "Name what you wish," he said simply, the words carrying to the edges of the clearing. "Money, protection, forgetting, you've earned the asking." The army leaned in, the murmur swelling to a hush of possibility. Turi's nod fervent, Enrico's gaze appraising. Alessia stood taller, the zinc bucket at her feet a silent witness, Mercy's line holding against the tide of power. The moment stretched, fragile as new ice, until Corrado approached from the tree line, his face taut under the beard. "Rivals," he reported low, hand signaling his scouts. Near the edge watching, reprisals sent on the wind. The army stirred, hands drifting to holsters, the mountain waking not just to respect, but to the shadow of war renewed. The clearing tensed like a bowstring drawn, Corrado's report hanging in the crisp air as the army's hands hovered near holsters, eyes scanning the tree line where shadows shifted like whispers of old feuds. Alessia felt the weight of it all, the 1,500 souls poised on her porch's edge. The dawns offer a fragile bridge over bloodied waters. Silencing had passed, but reprisal loomed, the mountain's hush now laced with threat. She stepped forward, snow crunching under her boots, the zinc bucket at her back a talisman of the night's hard-won line. Vittorio watched her, expectant, the inner circle arrayed like sentinels. Enrico's measured calm, Turi's paternal fire, Gaetano's scarred vigilance. The murmurs of the ranks swelled, a tide of curiosity and caution, but Alessia's voice cut through, steady as her father's anchor. "You honor what happened here?" she said, meeting Vittorio's gaze without flinching, the dawn light gilding her braid like resolve forged in fire. "Then prove it. Remove your hands from my village, no more shadows on the docks, no fees that break nets and backs. Rebuild this lodge, not for tourists, but as Casa Amato, a shelter for the cold, the lost, open to all who need it. Fund apprenticeships in Palermo and Messina, for the boys and girls who dream beyond the valleys, and aid the widows, yours and your enemies. Let peace be the price, not just words in the snow." The demands landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading through the ranks. Gasps threaded the murmurs, some soldiers shifting uneasily. The audacity of a maid rewriting the code striking like lightning on peaks. Internal resistance bristled immediate. A cluster of capos near the bikes muttered, faces hardening old blood calling for retribution, not restitution. One, a wiry lieutenant with a hawk's nose, spat into the snow, his glare venomous. Another gripped his rifle tighter, whispering of weakness. Gaetano Ruggieri, senior among them, studied Alessia like a battlefield map, eyes tracing her stance, weighing the terrain of her words against the contours of loyalty. His scar whitened under the jaw, a map of wars past, but he held silent, the scrutiny a pressure that tested her line without breaking it. Vittorio raised a hand, quelling the undercurrent, but before he could speak, Stefano Bellomo pushed from the crowd Enrico's nephew, his slight frame cutting through the giants like a thread through stone. He approached the porch, the gold cross glinting at his throat, and pressed it into Alessia's palm, the metal warm from his skin. "Take it," he whispered, voice soft against the tension. "My mother's words. The world is saved one night at a time." His eyes held hers, fervent, the gesture a quiet rebellion against the bristling capos, a bridge from the ledger's names to this dawn's reckoning. Enrico's frames hid a flicker, his nod subtle, the consigliere seeing the map shift under Mercy's hand. Alessia closed her fingers around the cross, its weight a vow renewed, and nodded gratitude unspoken, but binding. The moment shattered with a crack from the trees, a rifle shot, sharp as splintering ice, the bullet slamming into the porch post inches from Alessia's shoulder. Wood exploded in a spray of splinters, the acrid bite of gunpowder cutting the air, snow puffing where it struck the ground. Panic rippled outward. The army surged, Corrado's men pushing in disciplined waves toward the tree line, rifles rising, engines coughing to life in a growl of retaliation. Shouts erupted, "Rivals, fire!" The clearing erupting into controlled chaos. Bikes revving, sedans lurching forward like hounds unleashed. Alessia's heart seized, but she thrust her arms wide, voice rising above the fray. "Truce!" she cried, the word a thunderclap in the din. "Hold fire until the wounded are claimed. No blood here. Not on this ground." The plea hung, improbable as her open door, but Corrado faltered mid-stride, his raised hand echoing hers. His men halted at the edge, barrels trained but triggers untouched, the standoff a fragile thread. From the trees, a figure stumbled, a rival scout, perhaps, clutching a grazed arm collapsing into the snow, his comrades dragging him back under the army's watchful eyes. No further shots rang. The truce held, Alessia's line extending beyond the threshold, the mountain bearing witness to mercy's reach. The capo's bristles softened fractionally, Gaetano's gaze shifting from map to miracle. Vittorio stepped closer, the splintered post at his back, his face a mask of calculated gravity. The army quieted, engines idling to whispers, all eyes on the dawn as he addressed her and them publicly, voice carrying like a decree from the peaks. "It will be done," he said, the words binding as oath. "Hands off the village, as you name it. Casa Amato rises shelter for the cold. Apprenticeships funded, paths opened for the young. Widows aided, both sides, in silence and shadow no more." He turned to his lieutenants, gaze sweeping Enrico, Turi, Gaetano, the circle nodding in turn, honor sealing the pact. The ranks erupted in a low cheer, not triumph but transformation, the code rewritten in the light of her demands. Turi clasped Sero tighter, Enrico's nod deepening, Gaetano's scar easing into acceptance. Alessia stood taller, the cross heavy in her pocket, the new law a fragile dawn against old blood's tide. But as the men dispersed to secure the perimeter, Corrado knelt by the fuel drum at the lodge's side, a rusted relic for winter stores, half buried in snow. His hand brushed something unnatural. A torch, crude and soaked in oil, planted beneath, wick charred but unlit, positioned to ignite the drum in the night's blaze. Sabotage from within the ranks, a bristling capo's grudge, or a rival's plant in the chaos. The flame that could have consumed it all smoldered in the cold, a shadow on the fresh code. The torch lay exposed in the snow like a serpent's shed skin, its oily rag limp and accusing under Corrado's gloved hand. Alessia stared at it, the chill of sabotage seeping deeper than the morning frost. A reminder that new codes carved old grudges into sharper edges. Vittorio ordered it buried discreetly, without fanfare, but the shadow lingered as the army dispersed, columns peeling back to secure the valley. Promises hung in the air like exhaust, hands off the village, Casa Amato rising. Yet as the engines faded to echoes, Alessia felt the mountain's pulse quicken not with storm, but with the practical grind of transformation, where mercy met mortar and new tensions simmered beneath the surface. Weeks blurred into a rhythm of labor, the blizzard's white shroud yielding to the Santoro machine's inexorable churn. Soldiers and villagers converged at dawn, shovels biting into drifts to carve the road anew, broad backs and wool coats mingling with locals in patched sweaters. Laughter threading the grunts as a biker shared a flask with a fisherman. Scaffolds rose like skeletons against the lodge's timber frame, hammered by carpenters from Palermo, their mallets a steady drum echoing the peaks. Wire spools unrolled under the sun's tentative thaw, generators humming to life with a growl that lit the halls brighter than the amber bulb ever had. An engineer, summoned from Messina, spectacles fogged, blueprints clutched like sacred scrolls mapped radiant heating through the floors, pipes snaking beneath the planks to banish drafts forever. Warmth from the earth itself, he explained to Alessia, tracing lines on yellowed paper, a vow against the cold. Roofers swarmed the eaves, patching slate with tiles that gleamed like renewed hope, the structure groaning then settling, reborn from shuttered relic to beacon. The village stirred with the work, reactions a tapestry of caution and gratitude woven tight. Priests from the stone chapel below eyed the proceedings from afar, cassocks fluttering in the breeze, their murmurs of pacts with shadows, carrying on the wind cautious, as if blessing the devil's handiwork might taint the altar. Mothers, though, gathered at the edges, baskets of bread and olives in arms, eyes softening at the sight of their sons, hefting beams alongside the soldiers. "You've given them purpose," one whispered to Alessia, pressing a fig into her hand, gratitude raw as the dough she needed. But not all warmth endured. The local policeman, a wiry man named Rossi with a mustache like salt and pepper wire, pulled her aside one dusk, his badge glinting under the scaffold's shadow. "You're making devils look like saints, signorina," he warned, voice low, eyes darting to a passing capo. "This piece, it's paper over blood. One crack, and the village pays." Alessia nodded, the caution a familiar swell, but held her line. Mercy's transformation demanded risk, like her father's nets cast into uncertain seas. Inside the evolving lodge, now Casa Amato in blueprint and breath, Alessia enforced the house rules with the quiet steel of her vow. No weapons past the threshold. Holsters emptied into a reinforced box by the door. The zinc bucket retired to a shelf like a founder's relic. A sign-in book lay open on the oak table, pages filling with names, soldiers' scrawls beside villagers' careful script, each entry a thread of accountability. Purpose of visit, penned beside time in. Meals became ritual at long tables dragged from storage, benches groaning under the weight of shared plates, chickpeas simmered with garlic, bread broken by hands once clenched in feuds. Alessia presided from the head, doling portions with even measure, the air thick with steam and stories harmless ones, like the ledger's night, binding workers in the warmth they built. Tensions simmered low. A soldier's jest too sharp, a villager's glance too wary, but the rules held, turning strangers into stewards, the lodge pulsing with a fragile harmony. Gaetano Ruggieri tested the boundary on a midweek afternoon, the sun slanting gold through fresh-paned windows. The senior capo lingered after overseeing the wiring, his scarred frame filling the doorway as the crew broke for lunch. While Alessia tallied supplies in the kitchen nook, he slipped an envelope across the counter thick, sealed with wax that bore no crest but whispered of old ways. "For the work?" he said gruffly, eyes studying her like that battlefield map anew, probing for weakness in her resolve. The paper crinkled under her fingers, euros heavy inside, a gesture that skirted the vow generosity laced with control. Alessia weighed it, then set it aside without opening, her gaze meeting his unflinching. "Casa Amato takes no shadows," she replied, voice even as the steam from the pot. "This goes to light, not ledgers." By evening she'd converted it. The village school, drafty and dim, received a new heater, its coils humming against the chill for children who shivered through lessons. Receipts neatly inked, totals transparent, pinned to the notice board by the sign-in book, visible to all, workers, villagers, even the priests who wandered up. Gaetano returned the next day, scar twitching, but nodded once respect grudging, the boundary tested but intact, the new law etching deeper. Gio appeared in secret amid the throng, volunteering without fanfare, hat low, hands calloused from hidden labors, blending as just another carpenter's mate. Alessia spotted him one golden afternoon in the dining hall, sanding beams for the rafters, the rhythmic scrape of sandpaper a quiet counterpoint to the hammers outside. Dust motes danced in the light slanting through the windows, gilding his focused profile. The gash on his cheek faded to a silver line. She joined him at the workbench, picking up a spare block, their strokes sinking like unspoken dialogue. The air hummed with pine shavings and the distant laughter of the crew, a moment carved from the chaos. "You work like a man seeking absolution," she said softly, not looking up, the sandpaper whispering over knotty wood. Gio paused, the beam smooth under his palm, then admitted it, the surname spilling like a stone from a pocket. "Santoro," he murmured, voice thick with the shame that had stung her name before. "The Dawn's son." Ran from it all the expectations, the blood. "Thought the shadows hid me. But you saw through." His eyes met hers, vulnerable in the dust, the confession a bridge from ledger to legacy. Alessia sanded on, unflinching, the grain yielding under steady pressure. "Names change nothing here," she said, tone firm as the vow. "Santoro or Shadow, you sand the beam, or you leave. Work as if the dawn never came." Gio exhaled, the weight lifting fractionally, and they resumed in silence. The moment a pact within the pact his secret held, her rules unbent, the wood emerging smoother for the friction. As the scaffolds climbed higher and the radiant heat began to whisper through the floors, the transformation felt tangible. Casa Amato rising, not just in stone but in the tentative trust threading the valley. Yet new tensions coiled beneath, like roots pushing against frost. Rossi's warnings, priests' sidelong glances, the envelope's echo. The dedication ceremony loomed, banners planned for the porch, the village invited to witness the code made manifest. Enrico received the coded message at dusk, slipped into his coat pocket by a trusted runner amid the wiring crew, a scrap of paper, symbols inked like a fisherman's knots, dates, positions, a blade's curve. His frame slipped as he deciphered it in the lodge's quiet corner, the blood draining from his face. An internal faction bristling capos, perhaps those who'd muttered at her demands, planned to use the dedication as cover, striking in the crowd to end the dawn, unraveling the fragile peace before it could root. The coded message burned in Enrico's pocket like a hidden ember, its symbols a serpent's warning coiled around the dedication's joy. He shared it in hushed tones with Vittorio that night, the consigliere's voice a measured anchor amid the lodge's new hum, radiant heat whispering through floors, scaffolds gleaming under lantern light. The Don's face hardened, but he nodded once. The ceremony would proceed, a test of the code Alessia had written. "Let them come," he said, eyes distant as the peaks. "Mercy's price is paid in the open." Word rippled through the ranks, subtle shifts in patrols, eyes sharper on the bristling capos, but the village buzzed unaware. Invitations carried on the thaw's first breeze. Alessia felt the undercurrent, Rossi's warnings echoing in her quiet moments. But she held the line. Casa Amato's rise demanded faith, like her father casting nets into fog-shrouded swells. Dedication day dawned crisp and golden, the Nebrodi sun gilding the fresh slate roof, banners fluttering from the porch like vows unfurled. Casa Amato opened to the cold, letters burned bold into wood, the zinc bucket polished and prominent below. Engines gathered again, a symphony of arrival cars and motorcycles purring up the shoveled road, but this time intermingled with townspeople. Mothers in shawls clutching children, fishermen with calloused hands, priests in black trailing the crowd like cautious shadows. The clearing swelled with life, 1,500 soldiers mingling seamlessly with villagers, the air alive with accordion strains from a local band, notes weaving through the scent of simmering soup and fresh-baked bread. Long tables groaned under tureens of chickpeas and garlic broth, loaves broken and shared, laughter threading the hum, soldiers passing bowls to wide-eyed boys, a biker hoisting a girl onto his shoulders for a better view. Alessia moved among them, her shearling coat traded for a simple wool dress, the gold cross at her throat a quiet talisman, overseeing the feast with the steady grace of her rules made manifest. Yet beneath the revelry, tension coiled like smoke from the soup pots. Corrado prowled the edges, his beard flecked with breadcrumbs, eyes tracing the crowd like a hawk's arc. He identified the would-be assassins in fragments, hand signals flickering amid the throng. A subtle fist tap on a thigh here, a ringed finger brushing a lapel there, the internal faction's code betraying their positions among the soldiers. 3 capos, holdouts from the bristling murmurs, their faces familiar from Gaetano's maps, discontent etched deeper now, plotting to shatter the peace with blades in the crush. Gio, Sanding's secret shared but labor unceased, caught the shift from the ridge's flank, his vantage above the clearing spotting a man slinking for position, a sniper's nest among the rocks, rifle glinting faintly, the shooter's silhouette a dark promise against the sky. The music swelled, accordions dancing a tarantella that pulled the crowd tighter. When Alessia sensed the fracture, a hush in the hum, Corrado's hand twitching toward his holster. She stepped to the porch, the zinc bucket catching the sun like a beacon, and seized it by the handle. With a deep breath, she rang it like a bell clangs, reverberating sharp and clear, cutting the melody like a lighthouse through fog. The sound froze the crowd mid-step, faces turning, the accordion wheezing to silence, soup spoons hovering. 1,500 pairs of eyes locked on her, the banners framing her stance, the air thick with suspended breath. "My rules," Alessia declared, voice carrying like the bell's echo, steady against the mountain's vastness. "Coats off, all hands visible. No shadows here. Not today." Murmurs rippled, but the vow's weight held. Soldiers shrugged free of wool, villagers following suit. The clearing a sea of exposed arms and torsos, weapons laid bare or surrendered to the box by the door. The assassins faltered, signals aborted, their hands empty but intent plain in the sudden glare. The sniper on the ridge hesitated, barrel dipping as Gio's warning shout carried faint but urgent. Chaos erupted in the pause, a scuffle near the tables, one of the capos lunging with a concealed knife, the blade flashing toward a guard. Another hurled a torch oil-soaked rag aflame from the crowd's edge, arcing toward the banners like sabotage reborn. It sputtered in the air, landing short but spitting embers toward the soup tureens. Alessia leaped from the porch, Corrado at her side, their boots stamping the flame out in tandem, snow hissing, the torch reduced to sodden ash under their heels. Gio vaulted from the ridge, tackling the shooter mid-aim. The rifle cracked once, the single shot grazing Vittorio's sleeve as the dawn turned, tearing wool but drawing no blood. The capo crumpled under Gio's weight, the sniper's nest collapsing in a tumble of rock and rifle, the crowd surging, then stilling under the shock. The reckoning unfolded on the porch stage, the banners singed but standing, the zinc bucket's clang still echoing in the stunned hush. The captured faction, 3 capos and the shooter, bound and dragged forward, knelt in the snow, faces defiant yet cracked. Vittorio rose, sleeve torn, eyes blazing like forged steel. The army poised for blood rifles half raised, villagers shrinking back. "Justice," a bristling voice called from the ranks. But Alessia stepped between, the cross glinting at her throat. Her demand a vow renewed. "Banishment, not blood," she said, voice piercing the tension, meeting Vittorio's gaze. "Spare them, send them from these valleys, stripped of rank. Let mercy's price be exile, not graves. The code we wrote holds for all." The Don paused, the weight of her words a tide against his storm. Gio nodding from the side, Turi's hand on Saro's shoulder a silent plea. Enrico's frames reflected the crowd's murmur, shifting from outrage to awe. Vittorio nodded once, deliberate, turning to the captives. "Go beyond Sicily's shores, or face the old way." The faction rose, heads bowed, led away by Corrado's men, banishment a sharper cut than blades. With the shadow lifted, Vittorio signed the trust deed on the porch table quill, scratching parchment under the banners. Casa Amato deeded eternal, a charitable hearth for the cold. The crowd exhaled, accordions stirring anew, but Enrico stepped forward, unfolding a list in his steady hands. "The scholarships," he read, voice resonant, names rolling like a litany. "Palermo apprentices for village youth, Messina trades for the dreaming then the dead, both sides woven in. Fallen Santoros beside rival widows' sons, a tapestry of peace in ink." The reading bound them, villagers cheering tentative, soldiers saluting the fallen, the price of mercy paid in remembrance. As the feast resumed, soup ladled warmer, bread broken freer, a sudden warm wind gusted from the south unnatural, sweeping the peaks, melting snow in silver rivulets that raced down slopes. The road, hard won and vital, began to soften, mud churning under tires, a thaw flood swelling from the heights. Will their fragile peace hold under this new strain, or wash away like the code's fresh ink? The thaw flood roared down the Nebrodi like a vengeful river unchained, the warm wind's gift turning to curse as snowmelt surged from the peaks, carving gullies where the road had stood. Mud churned to slurry under the deluge, washing out the hard-won path in a night of thunderous rain, bridges buckling like broken vows. Casa Amato stood firm, its radiant heat a defiant glow against the storm, but the valley below wept water, isolating the lodge once more. Alessia watched from the porch as dawn broke gray and sodden, the banners sodden but unbowed, the zinc bucket brimming with rainwater like tears for the fragile peace. Yet the code held. Word spread down the slopes, and by midday, soldiers and villagers converged again, not in ranks of power, but hands joined in labor, shovels and picks glinting under the clearing sky. They rebuilt the road together, backs bent in unison, bikers hauling gravel from the riverbed, fishermen weaving baskets for debris, mothers corralling children to ferry stones. Corrado directed with quiet efficiency, his beard streaked with mud, while locals like Rossi the policeman, his warnings softened by the flood's impartial fury, swung hammers beside capos who'd once bristled at Alessia's demands. The work forged deeper bonds, laughter bubbling through the muck as a soldier slipped into a puddle, pulling a boy down with him in shared mirth. Rival widows received aid first, as the vow decreed. Envelopes slipped quietly to doorsteps in the village below, funds for roofs and hearths, no questions asked. One, a woman from the feuding clan, met Turi at the road's edge, her eyes wary but softening as he handed the package. "For the ones left?" he said simply, the gesture a bridge over old graves. The road rose anew, stronger in gravel and will, the flood's strain testing but not shattering the peace mercy's price paid in sweat and solidarity. In the quiet talks that followed, as the sun climbed higher and the mud dried to workable earth, resolutions bloomed like wildflowers in the thawed soil. Alessia found Don Vittorio at the lodge's edge one evening, the peaks bathed in amber as he gazed at the rebuilt path snaking below. His sleeve, mended from the graze, hung loose, the gravity of his frame softened by the season's turn. She approached, the gold cross warm at her throat, And they spoke of fatherhood raw, unarmored, the words a rare unraveling. Gio, Vittorio began, voice resonant but threaded with regret. I built walls for him, not wings. Thought the code was iron protect by command, not choice. Alessia nodded, her father's echo in her reply. The sea teaches otherwise. Nets bind but they also lift. You rode into storms for your blood. Now let him chart his own. The dawn's eyes, deep as mountain lakes, held hers, the discussion a quiet mending fatherhood not as chain, but as the vow she'd taught, practiced in the letting go. Gio sought her later. In the dining hall where beams he'd sanded gleamed under fresh lanterns, the long tables scarred but sturdy from shared meals. He stood hesitant, hat in hands, the Santoro name no longer shadow but stepping stone. I want to leave it, he said, voice steady as the wood he'd shaped. The life, the blood. Study carpentry in Palermo. Build something lasting, not break it. Alessia met his gaze, seeing the boy from the ledger, the runner from expectations. Then go, she said simply. But carry the rules. Hands visible, no shadows. The code you learned here travels with you. He nodded, relief cracking his resolve like sunlight on frost. The choice a resolution that freed him and echoed her counter to his confession, duty as wings, not weights. Turi found her by the stove the next dawn, sorrow at his side color restored, the young man's cough a memory as they stirred a pot for the lingering cruise. The underboss's paternal fire had tempered, his broad frame leaning on the counter like a man unburdened. Strength, he rumbled, watching his nephew ladle broth. I measured it wrong by the ones I dropped in the fight, not lifted in the peace. Alessia handed him a mug, steam curling between them. The mountain lifts us all, if we let it, she replied, the words a gentle tide. Turi clasped her shoulder, the acceptance a quiet vow. Strength redefined, in the ones saved, not slain. Enrico came at week's end, the consigliere's wire frames catching the light as he entered the kitchen, the sign-in book open but his name already etched from habit. He paused by the hook where Stefano's cross hung simple gold, visible to all who entered, a sentinel of the night that birthed the code. It stays, Alessia said, anticipating his thanks. Enrico nodded, voice measured as always. For the world saved, one night at a time. You've given us practice in a code we nearly forgot. His gratitude was in the nod. The cross's gleam a lasting emblem. Nephew's gift turned communal vow. Visible reminder for every hand that crossed the threshold. Vittorio returned alone as spring fully claimed the valleys, the peaks greening with tentative shoots, no entourage to shadow his steps. He approached the porch at dusk. Envelope in hand, deed papers crisp, inked with permanence, transferring Casa Amato to a charitable trust eternal. He left them on the oak table without ceremony, a note tucked inside. You taught us another code. We can only practice it. Alessia read it twice by lantern light, the words a quiet crescendo, the dawn's lone departure, a bow to the maid who'd redrawn the lines. The trust sealed it, shelter unbound, apprenticeships flowing, widows aided in perpetuity, the lasting change etched in law and legacy. In the final hush of resolution, Alessia climbed the ladder to the porch eave, hand-burned sign in grip wood charred simple, letters bold, Casa Amato, open to the cold. She hung it beside the banners, the weight settling true, a beacon against the fading light. Below, the zinc bucket sat empty by the door, polished by use and memory metal gleaming like a vow fulfilled, no longer sentinel but symbol. Snowmelt ran like silver threads down the mountain, carving paths of renewal, the fragile peace holding firm in the spring's embrace. And there you have it, the maid who turned a blizzard into a legacy, proving mercy can silence even the loudest engines. If Casa Amato's story of redefining strength hit home, give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs a reminder that one door can change everything. Comment: would you trust a mobster with your hearth? Subscribe for more story scripting magic like this. And check out the next video on your screen. It's a deep dive into real-life hospitality heroes that echo Alessia's vow. Thanks for riding this storm with me. See you in the next tale.